I wonder if you ever feel not quite good enough, or ever feel that you're not really worthy of love or good things coming into your life, or whether you carry a sense of kind of shame or just an unease with yourself and the sort of person you are. Well, what we're going to do today is think about the solution to those feelings and those thoughts we might have about ourselves. I'm going to give you a very practical tool, which is just simply 2 words, so that whenever you feel a bit unworthy or feel not good enough or feel down about yourself, you're going to be able to record these 2 words and they're going to change that moment instantly. So stick around, and this is going to be really helpful for a lot of us. I know this is helpful for me in my own life. Imagine that 100 people are not very well and go to the doctors and are given some drugs and medicines. Out of that 100 people, a third of them won't even fill out the prescription form. And out of the remaining 67 who do fill it out, half of them won't take the medication properly. They might miss doses, or they stop taking it halfway through, or not even take it at all. And people are more likely to give their pets medication than themselves. And Jordan Peterson, reflecting on this in his book The Rules of Life, says this. He says, "It's difficult to conclude anything from this set of facts except that people appear to love their dogs and their cats and their ferrets and their birds more than themselves. How horrible is that? How much shame," he said, "must exist for something like that to be true? What could it be about people that makes them prefer their pets to themselves?" Maybe you've had a friend that you've been trying to help and they're in a bad way, and you've given them some really good advice they already know about, to treat themselves better, maybe to rest a little bit more, to eat better, to sleep better, all sorts of things about how being kind to themselves. And maybe you've shared that with them and found that they've not done it, they've not treated themselves well. Or maybe that's true about you in yourself. And I wonder if you've ever thought about, well, what is it about my view of myself such that I don't want to treat myself well? You know, as Jordan Peterson says, what sort of kind of shame or opinion can we have of ourselves that we don't want to treat ourselves well? And that sense of unworthiness is called shame. Brené Brown, who's done lots of writing and lots of TED Talks on the theme of shame, this is how she defines shame. Listen to this for a minute and see if this resonates with your experience. She says, "I define shame as the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging." The belief that we're flawed and unworthy of love or belonging is shame. And all sorts of things can make us feel like that. Sometimes it's things that we've done in the past, kind of regrets or failures or really bad times or particular moments of things that we've done that can fill us with a sense of shame. We look at what we've done and we feel that we're unworthy. Or sometimes a sense of feeling that we don't belong, or our unworthiness comes from how others have treated us. Particularly if we're being treated badly from our parents growing up. But sometimes it can be relationships or friends or work colleagues or managers. Other people can treat us, and so that can make us think differently or feel differently about ourselves. But sometimes it's not even specific. We just have this general unease with ourselves. This kind of deep sense somewhere inside us that we're just not good enough, that we're just not worthy to receive all the good things in life or to receive complete acceptance or complete love. Whatever the cause, a much better question is to think, well, what are we going to do about it? A much better question is, well, we don't want to live like that. I don't want to wander the rest of my life feeling not as good as other people or carrying that sense of shame or unworthiness around. What can we do about it? And typically there's 2 common approaches. It'll be common amongst the media that you watch and friends that you interact with. People typically will take one of 2 approaches. They'll either deny or they'll try. That's the two solutions we're offering. Either deny it or try and fix it. And the denial is very, very common, particularly in the personal development, self-help thinking, whether you ever read any articles or magazines or books or YouTube stuff about it. You get this idea about just thinking positive, having affirmations, focusing on the good things of your life, things that make you feel not good enough or unworthy, just pretend they're not there. Don't think about it. Just deny them in a sense. And I'm a great fan of personal development materials. I use it a lot myself. I'm reading a really good book at the moment, but need to be really aware of some of the underlying philosophy. And one of them is that actually you just deny the sense of shame and unworthiness that we might feel. And if you think about it, that doesn't actually make a lot of sense. And one of the failures of the self-help movement and the kind of positive stuff, if you've ever tried it, is it kind of works for a bit, but keep rising up is the sense of inadequacy, a sense of perhaps failure, that you're kind of not good enough, the sense of unworthiness, and just covering it up with positivity doesn't seem to work. And if you think about it, it's obvious why that would be the case, because there's no other area of life where it's a good idea just to deny stuff. We wouldn't apply that to anything else. If somebody said to you, I've got a real debt problem, I've looked at my overdraft and it's really overdrawn, and my credit card and I've got loads of interest, I don't know what to do about it. You would never advise a friend, well, just don't think about it. Just think positive thoughts. Just hide it away so you can't see it, because that stuff's bringing you down. Or if your husband says to you, listen, I've got this real pain in my chest, it keeps coming, and typically he might say, that he's just going to not think about it, it'll go away. But you'd never say, well, that's a good idea. Why don't you just not think about it? And that'll make life absolutely fine. Or if your wife or a female friend's got kind of a lump somewhere, you never think, well, I think it's a good idea just to deny that. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist. There's a relationship problem that you've got with somebody. It's just never a good idea to pretend it doesn't exist, is it? And yet, just the idea of denying seems to be a very common way of thinking. People would never encourage each other to think about their sense of shame, or that they're unworthy, or they're not good enough. People very typically want to deny that and cover up. And it doesn't work in any other area of life, and it won't work with your sense of shame or your sense of not being good enough, your sense of being unworthy. If you just pretend, you deny it, you'll have already discovered this, it doesn't work because it keeps coming up. And then there's a second approach people take, and you've probably tried this one as well. Rather than just denying it, you accept it, and this time you try. You try to improve. So the things that make you not feel so good about yourself, you try and improve them. Or perhaps even more common is we try and compensate. So whatever our flaws and our failures, the things we don't like about ourselves, that we might try and compensate by being better in other areas. So we'll kind of be a good person, or we'll make lots of money, or kind of give money to charity, or advance our career, or make ourselves look better as a compensation for those things. But what you probably find is that there's no correlation between feeling good about one thing, compensating for something that makes you feel bad about yourself. For example, let's imagine that there's a really bad incident in your past. There's a time, maybe when you were younger, and you did something that was just awful and nobody else knows about it, but you carry a real sense of shame because you did that, and it makes you feel like a horrible person, and you kind of carry it with you. Now, that's kind of there, really. But now let's imagine that you give some money to charity to help starving children somewhere. And that might make you feel good and happy about that, but it doesn't cover up this sense of shame. There's no correlation, and you might have experienced that. All the good things that you do doesn't make you think, well, that bad thing doesn't matter. It doesn't compensate. It doesn't get rid of it. And so the sense of just denying and pretend something doesn't exist doesn't work as it comes to the surface. And the sense of trying to be a good person, trying to do the right thing, trying to improve, that doesn't seem to cover up our sense of shame and our sense of unworthiness either. And so what can we do? Is there any hope? Is there any solution? Is there another way where we can deal with those things that are in our life? A man called John Newton was born 300 years ago, and he was someone who lived with a huge sense of shame, and that came from the things that he'd done. But he found this third way, which he called amazing. And John Newton was a sailor, he was a slave trader, so he was involved in a horrendous industry that was the norm then, that's quite hard for us to get our heads around. But basically he would travel to Africa and he would kidnap men and women and children and take them back to other places and sell them just like products, just like human meat, and cause misery. And later on in his life, he would look back and think about those tens of thousands of people that he'd humanly trafficked. And they would be like ghosts in his conscience. He would be so aware later in life. But even out of all the slave traders, John Newton was considered the worst in terms of his aggression and his anger and his behaviour. And he was so hated that one time when he fell overboard, his shipmates, rather than throwing him a lifeline to rescue him, actually threw harpoons at him because they hated him so much. His captain one time just could not take any more of his horrible behaviour, that he stripped John Newton down to naked and he flogged him 8 dozen times in front of 350 men. After that, John Newton couldn't take it anymore. He'd had enough. He was going to take his own life. And he decided he was going to murder the ship's captain, then he was going to take his own life. He was so filled with a sense of anger and shame about the person that he was. And just before he could do that there was this massive storm that blew off, that hit the ship, and it damaged the ship so much that everyone thought they were going to die. And John Newton saw the one friend he had go overboard, never to be seen again. And then in that moment, in his darkest moment, thinking his life's completely over, just filled with a sense of shame and unworthiness of himself, he found himself crying out to God, that the God he turned away from and spoke against, that he had no time for. In that moment, he cried out to God to help him. And he actually survived the storm. God intervened and he got rescued, and he realised that God he'd called on, despite his sense of unworthiness and his sense of shame and not being good enough, that in his darkest hour, God had actually answered his prayer. And so then he started to turn to God and find out about more God and praying and reading the Bible and start to serve God. And he found that God's welcome and God's love and God's embrace just completely transformed his life. So that one day he wrote these words out of his experience. He wrote this, and he said, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." And so this third amazing way is based around this simple, mind-blowing idea that somebody else can make you okay. That somebody else can kind of sort that stuff in your life that makes you feel unworthy. And that someone else is Jesus. Now we're not talking religion here, and we're not talking philosophy. We're talking about Jesus. And Jesus' way of making us feel right with ourselves, Jesus' way of dealing with our shame or making us feel worthy, is unique and completely different from any other way in every other philosophy. I don't know if you sometimes kind of read about religions or read about certain philosophies or certain approaches to life, maybe certain self-help books, and you feel that they're all the same. They're kind of saying the same thing and they're just kind of rehashing it, and you think, is there any new idea under the sun? Well, what you find with Jesus is his way is unique. No other self-help book, no other religion, no other philosophy, no other recommendation, no other political system, nothing ever suggests anything remotely like the way of Jesus. Completely unique, and it's completely amazing. So what is that third way? Let's read some verses from the Bible just now, and then I'll kind of just explain what this third way is. And Phil is going to read us a few verses from Ephesians chapter 2. So that's Paul, the early church leader. He wrote this letter to the church in Ephesus. And we're going to read chapter 2, and we're going to read a couple of verses from that. And this just explains this third amazing way.
Today's reading is taken from the second letter of Paul to the Ephesians, verses 1, 4, 5, 8 and 9. Made alive with Christ. Once you were dead because of your disobedience and your many sins. But God is so rich in mercy, and he loved us so much that even though we were dead because of our sins, he gave us life when he raised Christ from the dead. It is only by God's grace that you have been saved. God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It is a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it.
Okay, and so here it is, that the third way to deal with our sense of shame, a sense of being unworthy, our sense of feeling not good enough. And this third way, which is so amazing, can summarise by the three phrases that we heard in that reading there. And the three phrases are this: once you were, but God, by grace. Once you were, but God, by grace. Once you were, but God, by grace. It starts with once you were, the first sentence we heard. Once you were dead in your sins, it says. Once you were disobedient. Once you were unworthy. You were not right. There was kind of something wrong with you. The reason why you sometimes feel that you've fallen short, the reason why you sometimes feel you're fallen short is because you've fallen short. It says in Romans 3, chapter 3, verse 23, it says, everyone has fallen short of God's glory, meaning what you were created to be. You're supposed to be kind of God's glory, this magnificent creature. This is who you were to be, loving and kind and fulfilled and wonderful and amazing. Everyone actually has fallen short of that. That they're not quite good enough. That sense of unease we have of not being what we were meant to be is because it's true. That's why the deny idea doesn't work. That's why just being positive and pretending everything's fine doesn't work, because once you were not good enough, once you had fallen short, it's true. And obviously the natural reaction is to kind of shy away from that truth, to not look at it full in face and realise that that's true about ourselves. But there's no reason to hide from it or deny it because of what comes next. Verse 1 says, once you were like this. And verse 4 then says this, it says, but God. But God. Once you were unworthy, once you had fallen short, you were in that situation, you were a mess, you were not good enough. But God, who was so rich in mercy, who loved you so much, did something about it. But God. But God. Two of the most wonderful words in the Bible, but God. You're in this situation, but God. And what God did is quite remarkable about our sense of shame, our sense of unworthiness, our sense that we've fallen short of who we were meant to be. And it all centres on Jesus. And in a sense, it's a divine exchange. It's a divine trade, if you like. And what God did is he sent Jesus. Jesus decided he wanted to come. And he lived a perfect life, so there was no shame. He hadn't fallen short. He was perfect. And then that perfectness died on the cross. That's what we celebrate at Easter on Good Friday and the resurrection on Easter Sunday. And he died on the cross not for his own shame or not because of his own worthiness, not because he deserved it, but because we did. And so in a sense, what he did is he took all our unworthiness, all our kind of failures and the stuff that's in us that's not quite right, that the Bible calls that sin. Jesus took it on the cross. And so that means that it's gone now from us, because actually it's gone to Jesus. And then the divine exchange is in return, Jesus gives us his not fallen shortness, as if you like, his glory and his perfectness. He gives it to us. You know, so a bit like you've got a beggar in a street who's got filthy rags. Sometimes the Bible uses this analogy. You've got a beggar and they've just got smelly, ripped, rags is what they're dressed in, and a billionaire comes along in the most expensive suit, the most fantastic clothes, and essentially he says to the beggar, listen, I'm going to give you my clothes and you can give me yours. And then what happens is one is suddenly perfectly dressed and one isn't. And that's what God does for us. We're in a mess, we can't fix it ourselves, we try and compensate, we try and deny, but it says once you were like this, you'd fallen short. But God, who is so rich in mercy, sent Jesus so there could be this divine exchange, so there can be trade. And what Jesus did on the cross is he takes all of that, all that stuff that makes us not feel not good enough. Jesus takes it from us and carries it. And in return, he gives us his goodness, the Bible calls it his righteousness, his kind of rightness with himself and his rightness with God and his rightness with other people. And there's this kind of exchange, this swap, if you like. And it's that swap, that but God, that changes everything. It just transforms how we see ourselves. It transforms how we feel. It transforms how we think. And it was, for John Newton, it was that which covered, so it didn't even cover, it dealt with his sense of shame, his sense of being a wretch. And it filled his life with joy, and it gave him a sense of peace and a sense of dignity and a sense of strength, so that he lived a completely different life for the rest of his days, even though he'd done all sorts of things wrong. It changes everything. And then it says in that reading, it says, once you're in this situation, you were a mess, you'd fallen short, but God, he sent Jesus, so there was a divine exchange. And then just to make sure that we've got it, it says in verse 8 and 9, it's by grace that you've been saved. It's a gift from God. It's God who's done it, so you can't boast about it. You can't say, oh, it's fantastic how saved I am. It's fantastic how worthy I am, because it's a gift. It's something that God has done for us. It's grace that God did it for us. We didn't do it for ourselves. And that's why Newton calls this amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that it saved a wretch like me. It saved a wretch like you. And this is good news, and it's also bad news in a way. It's good news, and it's also bad news. It's bad news because you've got to accept that you were a wretch. You've got to accept that once you were, that you had fallen short, that you were not good enough. You've got to look that in the face and say, you know what, that is correct. That is a right judgment of who I am, the sort of person I am, that I've fallen short, that I'm not good enough. And so there is bad news there. And some people struggle with that. They can't accept that. And maybe you're watching this video and you're just saying, that's not true. I'm not accepting that. And so you've got to have that bad news and kind of accept that. But then there is the good news. The good news that somebody has done it for you, that somebody has took your shame. They've took the stuff that makes you not worthy. They've done for you what you couldn't do for yourselves. And it's a sweet sound. That sense of grace, that somebody's done for you what you couldn't do for yourself. And so that means that regardless of what you've done, regardless of how far you've strayed, regardless of how many church services you've been done, regardless of what people have told you, that actually grace awaits you. A grace awaits even you, ready to welcome you. You're not so unique that you're excluded from this. Everybody's welcome, and everybody gets in who wants to. And so that means if you're not a church person, or you're not sure you're a religious person, maybe you're new to viewing what we do online, maybe you've been watching for a while and you're exploring what life's about. What that means is if you want, you can be in. You can be included. You can be accepted by God, because whatever stuff's in your life that you think is a barrier has been dealt by with Jesus. And the only thing you need to do, the only thing you can do, is choose to accept that. The beggar on the side of the road that's just in kind of filthy rags, when the billionaire comes and offers him a Marnie suit, and the beggar's got maybe like £1.50 in his coppers, he can't really offer that. That's not going to buy you an Armani suit. When the billionaire offers him it, the only thing he can do is accept it or not accept it. He's got nothing to contribute to it. He just needs to decide. And you're in exactly that same position, that Jesus has died for you, and you just need to decide whether you want to accept that gift, or whether you're going to live in denial or keep trying, or you could just accept it. And then once you've accepted it, it's about living within that. I know Christians who've accepted that gift, but then they don't fully experience it. They don't fully kind of live with it. They still have a sense of shame a little bit, a sense of not being good enough. They condemn themselves too easily. And it's interesting, John Newton in that hymn, Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound, which is the first verse. One of the other verses says this: through many dangers, toils and snares we have already come, but grace that brought us this far, and grace will lead us home. Grace has brought us this far, and grace is going to lead us home. What Newton is saying is amazing grace that saved a wretch like me is how I get in, and how I continue to live for the rest of my days is by grace. I don't get in by grace, by what God's done, and then I try and be a good person, and I try and do all the right things, and I try and keep the rules in order to keep in, as if it's down to my work. No, it's grace that keeps us going. And so that phrase that we had from our Bible reading, but God, is the way to carry that through. Whenever you do something wrong, or you remember the sense of shame or the regrets you've got in your past, well, as soon as those come to mind and you don't feel good enough, you need to say these two words to you. So this is the practical tool in how you kind of apply that, is these two words, but God. You think about the things you've done in the past and you feel shameful, like saying, actually, but God. He took them on the cross. Or maybe you get a sense of rejection and people around you don't accept you because of whatever it is about yourself, and you start to feel unworthy and not acceptable as soon as you think about that or feel that. But God saw me as such precious, of worth so much that he paid Jesus for me. You know, in a sense, you know how much something's worth by the price that's paid for it. And you, the price you're worth is Jesus, God's own son. So whenever you feel not good enough, a sense of rejection from other people, you can live by grace. It can carry you home by thinking, but God. Or even when you have that general unease, and it's nothing specific you've done or what other people say, it's just kind of there. You just feel not good enough, perhaps, that you can just think, actually, but God, who was so rich in mercy, who loved you so much, he gave Jesus. And if you just remember that, but God, it doesn't matter what it is that makes you feel not good enough, unworthy, but God, there's the divine exchange. You're dressed in the purity and the kind of rightness of Jesus. Ernest Hemingway wrote a story called The Capital of the World. And in it, he talks about a story between a father and a son and their relationship and how strained it become. And the son was called Paco. It was a common Spanish name at the time. And their relationship becomes strained. And eventually the son left home and they lost touch because of their falling out. And then after a long time, the father come to his senses and he really missed his son. And he tried to reach out for him, but he didn't know when he'd gone. And he spoke to friends and contacted people, and nobody knew where his son Paco had gone. And so then in a sense of desperation, the story goes, he put an article in the Madrid newspaper, and he just put this. Let me read it. He says, "Dear Paco, please meet me in front of the newspaper office at noon. All is forgiven. Love, Father." And he'd put it in an advert. And at noon, he was waiting there. And then when he arrived at noon at the place, he found that there was 800 men standing there, all called Paco, all longing for a father who was going to forgive them. Are you a Paco? Are you longing just to be welcomed? Are you longing for someone just to love you? Are you longing to be forgiven? Well, there's a sweet sound called grace that is so amazing that it can save even a wretch like you. And all you need to do is accept it. Accept the offer that Jesus will take all your shame. He'll take everything that makes you not feel worthy, and in exchange he'll give you his perfectness, his rightness, his goodness, and you can be dressed in that rather than your rags. You just need to say yes. And it's like, well, how do you say yes? Is it a complicated formula? Do I need to say the right words? Do I need to do loads of religious things? No, this is how you do it. Yes. It can be as simple as that. You just, in your heart to God, you just say, yes, I accept your amazing grace that saves even a wretch like me. And as we just listen to that song, maybe that's what you want to do in your heart. Whatever it is that makes you feel unworthy, you might just want to think now, but God. Yeah, all that, but God. And every time you don't feel great this week, my prayer is the Holy Spirit will bring those words to your mind. But God, who's so rich in mercy, who loves you so much. Maybe you want to say yes to God just now as we listen to Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how
So now's your opportunity to give as part of our offering, to invest in the work of Hope Church Oswestry. And this is part of our worship. It's part of our love for God and other people, that the amazing things he's given us, that we also want to give to others. And I know many of you will give regularly, but if you don't do that, then there's a chance now to give. And you can do that by texting 785. You could text HCO10 to give £10 or HCO20 to give £20. And if you want to give more, then just send more than one text, and that'll be taken off your phone bill and invested into our work. Or you could give on our website, hopechurchoswestry.org.uk/give, and you could do a one-off donation there, or even better, you could set up a regular donation through that. And we would really appreciate it if you're able to do that. We're just grateful for those people that give regularly and finance all the amazing work we do. Pays for our staff costs and the technology costs we have, and also the money that we give to other people locally, places like the food bank, the money that we give to Africa, Uganda, Montenegro, Asia, all sorts of good causes, and we'll use your money wisely. And thank you for trusting us with it, and for just being part of what we're doing. Really grateful. Thank you very much. And if you're finding this really helpful, I encourage you just to click that like button and also subscribe. And that means that YouTube will promote what we do more and more. If lots of people like it and subscribe to it, then they'll promote us to other YouTube users. And it means that the message we're trying to convey can get out to other people even more. And we don't just try and connect on a Sunday or connect through this main message. We also try and connect in groups during the week. We have Zoom groups. I think it's about 11 groups at the moment. About 120 people, I think, are in our Zoom groups. And if you're someone who wants to meet with other people during the week and you're not part of a group, then you can see my email on the screen there. Just send me an email and we can put you in a group. We've got people of all ages and genders and understanding, and you'd be really loved and welcome if you want to be part of what we are doing. Just send me an email and we'll be able to connect you in with a group. And lots of other ways to connect with us during the week. You can see on Mondays and Tuesdays we try and do little excerpts from this message that you've heard today. Maybe 3-4 minutes. We put that on our YouTube channel and promote that through Facebook. And really that's just about giving you resources so you can get the message out to your friends. Just give them a little flavour of what we're about. And it's a great way to invite people to church in a very accessible way. So when you see those, please share them. Please send them to people you think they might help. And then we have worship led on a Wednesday evening. That's on our Facebook page. If you search for Hope Church Oswestry on Facebook, you'll find us. And 6:30, some music by one of our musicians, just a chance to connect with God during the week. And Thursday, one of the leaders of Hope Church will release a 5 minutes of hope, just encouraging, inspirational, few minutes reflection, just to help you connect with God on a Thursday. And that's on our YouTube channel as well. We're also on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, just search Hope Church Oswestry and you'll find us there as well. And great ways to connect. So search for us on all those channels and come and be part of what we're doing.
Hi, this is my favourite verse in the Bible, and I've underlined it, and I'm going to read it. It's Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. I know it was short, but it means a lot, because I sometimes wonder how the earth was created, because people talk about a Big Bang, and I wonder, is the Big Bang real? Did God actually create the world? So I wondered one time, what did God create the Big Bang, or did he do as the Bible says? That's something that you can think about. Bye.
Great is your faithfulness, great is your faithfulness. You never change, and you never fail, oh God. Great is your faithfulness. Great is your faithfulness. You never change, you never fail, oh God. True are your promises. True are your promises. You never fail, you never fail, oh God. So we raise up holy hands to praise the Holy One through us and His to come. We raise up holy hands to praise the Holy One through us and His to come. Wide is your love and grace. Wide is your love and grace. You never change, you never fail, oh God. Wide is your love and grace. Wide is your love and grace. You never change, you never fail, oh God. So we raise up holy hands to praise the Holy One who was and is to come. We raise up holy hands to praise the Holy One who was and is to come. You were, you are, you will always be. You were, you are, you will always be. So we raise up holy hands to praise the Holy One who was and is to come. We raise up holy hands to praise the Holy One who was and is to come.
And that's it. That's the end of our service. Thank you for everyone who's contributed to it. And as you go into your week, will you remember that, but God? When you have those difficult moments, when those thoughts cross your mind, will you just sit for a moment and go, but God, and may they give you the power and the strength that you need. Don't forget to like our page and to share it. You've experienced our service now. Maybe you know somebody who needs to know the message of today. Maybe you can just send this on to them. And don't forget to connect with us throughout the week. And may God bless you, and may you just have a fantastic experience for the rest of this day. Thank you, and see you later. Bye-bye.